Welcome, everyone, and welcome back, everybody who is just in the Global Social Witnessing Call with Thomas. And thank you for coming back. I feel that the topic that we're looking at tonight is just so important that we look at it, especially in groups that are linking into maybe more from the side of heartfulness, spirituality, mindfulness, transformation of consciousness, that we don't push aside the topic of how collective trauma relates to money and how money relates to climate change, which is what we're going to speak about tonight. So I feel really proud of all of us for showing up for this topic. And I'm also delighted that we have two women bringing this topic present tonight, because I remember many years ago, there was this wonderful woman from Africa, Sabon Fusome, who led grief rituals. And she had such a strong stand on the topic that the world was in such a state because women had left the sphere of economy, and that it was a space of our reality where it was very important to have masculine feminine balance and to bring that back. So I want to start by just thanking Dana and Patricia for your work in this area of life, this arena. And yeah, then I just want to introduce you first. So I'm not sure whether you want to be pinpointed while I'm introducing you. Sometimes it's a little bit uncomfortable, but just, thanking you for being here with us tonight.
Thank you.
Yeah, so Patricia Farrar-Rivas, and I'm absolutely not sure whether I've said your name correctly. But
that was lovely.
Oh, great.
It's the Spanish pronunciation, but that was very nice. Thank you.
So Patricia is the CEO of Veris Wealth Partners, and she has been providing investment advisory and wealth management services since 1992, with a focus on sustainable, responsible, and impact investing. Patricia is a principal consultant to the InvestNet sustainability platform. Earlier in her career, Patricia worked with Veris co-founder Michael Lent and community leaders in Central America on economic development, local empowerment, and social justice. She realized the degree to which economic factors were embedded in the challenges they faced. And as the responsible investing industry was emerging in the US, turned her attention to advising asset owners on the potential impact of their investment policies and decisions. Patricia is a certified investment management analyst and a certified investment strategist. And Dana Lanza founded Confluence Philanthropy in 2009 after serving as the executive director of the Environmental Grantmakers Association. While at EGA, the Environmental Grantmakers Association, Dana provided networking services to over 250 grant-making organizations from across North America and Europe. Confluence Philanthropy's mission is to transform the practice of investing by aligning capital with values of sustainability, equity, and justice. Confluence supports and catalyzes a membership network of private, public, and community foundations, family offices, individual donors, and their values-aligned investment advisors representing more than $92 billion in philanthropic assets under management, and over 3.5 trillion in managed capital. Within the membership, Confluence leads a $2 trillion investor coalition for racial equity and a climate solutions working group of paradigm shifting investors. Wow, right? That's a lot to hold. And both Dana and Patricia have also been participating in the trauma-informed leadership training that the Pocket Project offered over the summer and invited quite a few of their colleagues to also participate. So yeah, just again, a big welcome to both of you and thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I wanted to say, just to start off, those are big numbers, and just to circle back to the beginning already of this conversation, a lot of the original members of Confluence are women, and Patricia was one of the first women I met who helped us start the organization. So I think just centering, at the beginning of our discussion, the power of women and the importance of women in bringing attentionality and consciousness to shifting financial resources, which is obviously predominantly historically a male space in capitalism. So thanks, Patricia, for all your support for Confluence and so many of the other organizations we work with.
And thank you. And I think that was, well, thank you for doing this. It's wonderful, the work that the Pocket Project is doing, and especially it's really exciting to see you there at COP26. So it's such an important time to bring, the intersectionality of the human experience and what is happening with our climate together in one place. And the Pocket Project and the experience here has been really, really transformational for me. But, Dana and I did talk a lot about the role of women, especially in finance, and the transition from, a patriarchal structure and bringing more and more women into it. When I was first in this industry, I was one of 3%, and that has changed over time. That's gradually changed, but we also see that within finance, and especially people that control the flow of capital, that is really about 95, 97% white male. And so not only bringing the women's voice into it, but also the voice of, Black, Brown, Indigenous, and other people of color into the voice of where does money flow? Why does it flow? How it flows? So it's an exciting time because that is it's very different now that is actually a conversation across the financial services industry, and not just within what we consider to be the values aligned sector. So I haven't seen it happen in this way until the last year or two.
Yeah, amazing. And, thank you for inviting in those diverse voices. And we wanted to start off by bringing one of those voices present here tonight. And this is Pat McCabe's voice. And some of you were there maybe last week, Monday, exactly 7 days ago, which is a beautiful sacred number. So we're cycling back at 7 days, where Pat McCabe gave a very strong understanding of the situation around money in the world, where she said, and I'm putting it partly in my word and I'm shortening it, so, bear with me here, but she said that at the moment, 26 individuals are holding 50% of the wealth of the world. And she also said, we would have to actually look into what those different terms mean, how we use language. But what this shows us for sure is that money has been extracted from the web of life, from the plants, from the living beings, from the earth, from the men and the women and the children who have worked for 50% of the wealth of the world to come to lie in the hand of 26 individuals. And that actually this money is life that is being withheld from life. And right now, life is screaming out for life. We see the abundance of life crumbling because of the scarcity in life. And she brought Chief Seattle in, who said, one day they will find out that we cannot eat money, and that this day is coming close. And she ended by saying, soon that money will start losing its meaning. But right now, it can still have an effect. It can still have a bearing on the physical world and be used to redress the imbalance. So those were her words. And yeah, we wanted to open up with those tonight and bring them back here. And from there, really ask you both, how do you see this collective trauma around money playing out in our world today? And how does money and where it is held in the system, how it is held in the system, relate to climate change? And I know this is a big, we're not making it easy for you, but I know that you're up for it. So over to you two, and thank you for addressing this.
I would like to start, and then Patricia, maybe I can talk about a little bit about the historical roots of capital, and then you can share a bit about where you see it going in our work together. So one of the things I also love about working with Kasia is she was the executive director of the Global Villages Network, Eco Villages Network, for a long time, and so she has a lot of experience working in rural Africa and other places. And when we look at the origin of money, money was basically created so that people could move beyond very hyper local reciprocal economies where you would, you needed water and someone else had firewood. So you gave them water and they gave you firewood, and people didn't really keep track, but they did in kind of a social relational way. As people began traveling farther and farther away, you couldn't tote water or firewood or animals with you. So you needed some token of currency. And that is more or less where money originated. And in that beginning origin of money is where I think trauma truly exists for us as human beings. Because when we stopped living at that hyper local communal level and we started using tokens for our reciprocal relationships with one another, we began disassociating from our communities and from our land. And doing that travel and trading abroad, whether it was just a day's walk away or weeks away or years away on ships, began creating a global network of humans moving around and sharing goods and services, but also losing their sense of place and origin. And a lot of human trauma is really about a sense of place. It's about a loss of a sense of place. And money, if you look at what people spend money on, they use it now to create a sense of place for themselves by buying homes, by buying objects that make them feel like home, by buying objects that make them feel safe in the absence of a very, very, very deep ancestral sense of community. And what are we going to do now to fix this? That is one of the, I think, questions that's really confronting us, because humans have spread all over and we live all over the world, and most of us are not living in our indigenous homelands, right? So how do we correct this? And I think that, yeah.
So sorry, just before you speak on, could you just put the hair where your microphone is?
Oh, sorry.
Your shoulder, just because it's
Hitting it, yeah.
No, you don't even need to hold it. We're hearing you really clearly. Just, I might remind you again, just the hair is brushing, and yeah. Beautiful. Thank you. Sorry for interrupting.
It's okay. So I think the disconnection to the planet is rooted in that historical disconnection from community and from place. And yet the goal of values aligned investing is to think about how to bring those values of community, place, respect for the earth, respect for relationships, the intentionality that's embedded in all of that, a sense of interdependence, back into the economy. And this was lost a very, very long time ago. So again, Patricia is one of the pioneers. certainly one of the women pioneers, but also just one of the pioneers in the socially responsible investing movement, which has changed brands many times over a few decades, and now is known as impact investing or values aligned investing. So Patricia, I'll let you share a little bit about where you think we are now in terms of values aligned investing and where it might be able to go.
Yeah, and I think just to bring also up, thank you, Dana, for that, is one other point of also looking like, especially for us in the United States, what has happened of a dislocation from especially Black individuals and their connection with the land, because being brought here as slaves and then being slaves on the land and then being forced to leave the land in one way or another, that there has been a disruption and trauma and disconnect between Black and brown people in the land too. And we can talk about this later when we talk more about kind of technology and where agriculture is going. But I think the key thing that we've been thinking about for the most part over the many, many years of socially responsible investing and what is now values investing or impact investing is, what is the approach? Are we divesting from companies that have extractive processes? If we're divesting, I think what started to happen early on in this movement, but much more so in, say 2007, is like, once we're divesting, what's crucial is where does that capital flow to? How do we make sure that as you're moving, you're not just stopping, you're saying, okay, we have to build and nurture. We have to have capital flow. I think of capital as water. It can be very, very nurturing, or it can be very destructive. So how are you looking at changing the capital flow system of both who controls it, where it flows, how it flows? Keep remembering that as Dana is talking about reconnection, how do you bring those voices back up into the system where it is not whoever is effective by whatever processes that is being created, whether it's the extractive processes of gas and oil or extractive agriculture, or the extractive work practices. New practices, who and how are people being affected? How do you bring the voices of the people that are what we could call all of the stakeholders into the voice, into the room, into the table, the decision, the room, where at that table where decisions are made? There's many people that go, oh, there's a table somewhere. Like, we want them to know, yes, there is a table somewhere and your voice is necessary. So I think it's really that transition of how do we get out of these extractive processes and how, but also how are we looking at what is nurturing, what is also, and this will be the last thing I say, what is wealth? How is wealth defined? So wealth is not just money. Wealth is the broader spectrum of wealth, of community, of healthcare, of having access to food, of having access to opportunity and education. So how are we changing our honoring of money as this being the end goal to transitioning, understanding it's only a tool, as Dana explained. It's not true wealth.
Yeah, I think Pat McCabe's message is that it's not real, right? That we've created this imaginary thing to represent our relationships and our desires and our basic needs, but money is not real. But now in modern culture, it's the most important thing there is. It's the most real thing that there is. So I think healing the climate crisis is actually interrogating that sort of relationship that we have to money, our assumptions about money, and our assumptions about what's important. Because no matter whether we reach net zero in 2030 or 2050 or 2070, we're all going to need to learn to live radically differently, and probably with a lot less, with more simplicity and valuing the things that we have much more. We know without any question that there's going to be supply chain disruption. We're already seeing it. And that will mean appreciating things on some level much more deeply than perhaps we do now. And that will be good for all humans. But to Patricia's point, the question around equity and justice is critical here. And that's what makes the COP process around climate so challenging, is how to give those who have already lived without for so long equal access to the things that I myself take for granted and assume is a human right. A lot of the things I assume are human rights, the way I act, are not human rights. And other people don't even have access to the things that I consider basic needs. So this rebalancing of the human ecosystem is what's required to solve climate change.
Yeah, beautiful. And I love how the two of you have connected this topic also to our loss of relationality to place and to community and the reciprocity. And, you know, I understand that on the one hand, we can say that money is meaningless. And on the other hand, I feel that it is actually full of meaning. Like when I hear, in the sense also that it is like a concentrated expression in some ways, the way that it's moved and concentrated could also be seen as a concentrated expression of many archaeological layers of collective trauma. Cutting down the forests, money goes somewhere. Extraction of the herds of bison in the US, money flows somewhere. Colonization of whole continents, money flows somewhere. Slavery, money flows somewhere. And all those concentrations haven't been redressed, right? So now in these 26 individuals holding 50% of the wealth of the world, that is also represented. So, you know, I've never fully felt it like that before. I think this is actually the first time I personally feel the radicality of seeing it that way. And I know that that you both also work with people, sometimes young people, who inherit a lot of money that comes from sources, you know, comes out of an ancestry that has been involved in processes of extraction, of radical, unjust behaviors that have led to this concentration of wealth. And of course, you know, there might be others where it was just a brilliant invention and purely, you know, in the light. I'm not sure, but I imagine that many of these people are carrying quite a heavy load in terms of also carrying that money and now searching for ways how to be with that. Could you share a little bit from your experience of that, how it is? And yeah, I would appreciate that. Back to you.
Well, you know, there's a number of processes that people go through. I think Dana and I are both very familiar with this, with many of the people that we work with, of the sense of shame associated with that trauma and the seeing the wealth or the money in some instances as it being evil and bad. And that is, you know, traumatizing to them. And so often in discussions with people where they are in the discussion with people that have been traumatized by that wealth, this is where I think a lot of the work from presencing really helps and comes in, because it's important for everybody to understand and learn the real history, because often the truth has disappeared. The truth is no longer there because it's coming across as a new story that often hides what really happened to create the traumas in the first place. And really looking at new systems for how do you redirect that flow, and that in and of itself is being discussed. They are still directing that flow. So there still is that disconnect. You know, it's kind of looking at land being stolen. You know, you look at the wealth of, you know, countries being stolen through colonization, or through, colonization in the United States with indigenous populations, with slavery. Really coming to terms with that, of what did that really mean, and how do you transition years and years of wealth accumulation to the degradation of communities that has come about due to wealth being taken away from them. And I'm saying wealth in the sense of not wealth as money, but wealth as land, access, healthcare, to their, whatever it is, their culture being taken away. So there's a lot of work being done right now within families of looking at ways to how do they really transition their wealth so that there is a goal of reparations within it. But it certainly is not easy work. Certainly is not easy work, but there's what we're seeing is more and more opportunities, which is wonderful, from the side of indigenous populations, of Black and brown people, when I look in the United States, from other people and indigenous populations throughout the world, being the ones that are bringing forward the new ideas of innovation and how to fund that. So how to redirect that flow back. But not an easy task or subject.
Yeah, I would say before I joined philanthropy, I was an environmental justice organizer, and I lived in and worked and lived in Bayview Hunters Point in San Francisco, which is one of the toughest hit in communities for environmental racism in the United States. Just egregious abuses around environmental health, and a lot of them affect women and children. And for whatever reason, I left that job and I was recruited to work in philanthropy. And I think I joined philanthropy with a lot of assumptions about money and about wealth. And I think really, honestly, one of the greatest gifts of my life has been watching those myths and assumptions and stereotypes explode time and time again. And I think this is going to be a very provocative thing to say and trigger a lot of people, but I want to say it because I think it's important to say it. I think one of the things that's really holding us back right now is this sense of projecting so much anger and frustration and just ire on people who have resources, and a lot of assumptions about people who have resources. Working in philanthropy, let me tell you, the maze of legal constructs for a person of inherited wealth to get out of those constructs and just give away all their money, it's almost impossible. Patricia knows this better than I do because she advises people. I mean, sitting with young people who are so traumatized from inheriting and want to give away this money, and they're fighting with lawyers. They're in their early 20s and they're sitting down with male lawyers arguing with them about their responsibility towards this money, the guilt that they get around legacy. Well, you're going to lose all the resources that your grandfather raised for our family, the narratives that are embedded in these stories. And a lot of people of inherited wealth walk around the world with a deep sense of shame and guilt and culpability simply for being born. Maybe they've argued every year for years about redistributing these resources, but there's a whole family complex. Beyond that, there's a whole legal complex forcing them to stay in this position of privilege and power. Now, is everybody like that? No, everybody's different. But we have to approach everybody in this complicated capitalist kind of crucible that we're cooking in right now with some sort of curiosity and compassion, and take a step back around judgment and assumption, because we don't know. Maybe the person's, that you think a certain way about because they have resources, or you think they have a certain lifestyle. We should listen to their personal story and build the trust so that they're willing to tell you. And that's what I love so much about the Pocket Project and about Thomas's work, is because when I discovered the work, I felt like, wow, this could be a tool that we can use to unleash this capital, because the only way we are going to heal this is through love and compassion and forgiveness in every direction, because we are all suffering deeply from this economic system. And we don't need to get into who has more, who suffered more, who, it doesn't really matter, because climate change is going to be the great equalizer for everything and everybody. So what we need to do is, I think, learn these tools and slow down. And the presencing that Patricia mentioned is critical for us healing everybody. And when we meet people in those places of compassion and a willingness to listen and not to aggress them because they seem to have more than other people, they can then open up and come forward because they feel safe. But when we just attack people, they just retreat and they don't want to have anything to do with the rest of the world. And so that's why you have this really intense class structure globally as well. Not to say that it's right for 26 people to have all the wealth, but there's a whole complicated system that makes that possible. Not those individuals are part of a larger system that needs to change. The system should not allow that.
And Dan and I last night spoke a little bit and spoke about putting the system in hospice.
Yeah, I love that.
So it's like the discussion between, do you tear down the system? You know, how do you change the system? And one of the things, unfortunately, that happens in system change, if it's too radical and too quick, is often the people that you're trying to support are the hurt the most from that system. And how are you working within these legacy structures that many people feel, and, from the side of the first generation, that they actually built these structures in a very compassionate way on purpose to be able to give away wealth. And then, so how do you comfortably let them know that, yes, those were good and wonderful efforts to begin with, but yes, now times have changed. It's not enough. There needs to be more. How do you look at the all of the wealth that is in philanthropy or in donor advised funds, where it's a foundation or donor advised funds, and how much of it is supporting the system, just to continue to support the system, and how can that change? So it's not just supporting the financial system, because a lot of that money does that, supports the financial system. How are you transitioning that so it really is moving towards reparations, moving towards money going back to the people that should be benefiting from wealth? We all should be benefiting from wealth, not just 26. And we know if that continues, it will get more and more concentrated. So.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. And I think what you said both is so important. This, key part of the practices that we have in the Pocket Project is to become really aware of where do we distance. And I think that many of us carry personal trauma around money, or also in our ancestry, there's a lot of trauma around money. And we bring that to the table, on the one hand around authority, and we distance easily from the leaders of the world, see them as very far away, and the same with people who have a lot of wealth or a lot of money. I think you're right that it easily triggers that sense of distance, and that's something, that I've experienced with some of the beautiful, generous philanthropists that I know, what it means to be seen in that, to be embedded in a community with that, to be able to even just speak freely about their wealth. Like I know Findhorn has created consciously safe spaces for people also to be able to speak about it. And, also the sense that constantly somebody is wanting something from you, when you're in that kind of position. So there's a lot of pain and hardship connected to it that we also wouldn't really,
I think, if you think about it, who is not traumatized by money? So anytime you're talking to someone about money, you're already having a traumatized conversation. So if you don't have these tools that you're teaching, Kasha, to be present with that, then you're already in a dangerous space, because everybody's got issues about money. So it doesn't matter if they have it or they don't have it, they've got issues about it. And we have no training anywhere, in our lives to teach us to talk about money in a healthy way that feels safe and doesn't feel charged and doesn't feel assumptive. I think this is one of the keys to solving the climate crisis, because the climate crisis is a crisis of not of scarcity, as someone was saying earlier today, but of greed. And that greed comes from our fear of money and needing to hoard, and our disassociation from the land. So one of the most powerful tools we have for healing the climate crisis, is to get in touch with our own issues about money. A lot of the energy is and well directed around global leaders and big companies and executives, and nobody's trying to let them off the hook. But if you don't know those people, you should be out in the street protesting. You should be running in your local elections, trying to get the right people elected. Then you also need to be sitting deeply with your own values about money, what you need and what you don't need, your issues, safety issues as they're connected to money, and how to talk with family about it and partners and people like that.
Yeah, and it is that tension between abundance and scarcity.
Mm-hmm.
So what is as you're living in abundance, many people feel like they're living in scarcity. And how do we talk and adjust around that? So really looking at how are we dismantling those divides, and also personal commitments as people are doing this work, your own personal commitment and being your awareness of what you're doing on a day-to-day basis in regards to, and I think this becomes a very difficult part of like, how do you also think about like, how am I as a consumer? And how do you translate that in a way so more and more people transition how they consume in a way where you're not, so that many of the consumers are people that like, look, I finally, so I get some money, I want to consume like the rest of the world consumed, right? So there is, that tension too of like, yes, you've had it for so long, now we have an opportunity to have it and now we can't, right? It's like, so changing the concept, the narrative of, once again, I get back to what is wealth, what is abundance, and so how do you feel move in a way so that you're not feeling like you need more and more and more because you're living in such scarcity, and getting back, simplifying life so that the quality of life is measured higher than the amount of money you have.
Yeah, beautiful. So maybe we can come to, the climate change negotiations a bit more, and the situation here in COP26, where actually the corporations are playing a bigger and bigger role, it feels, and today, Alok Sharma, the president of the COP26, said something really interesting, which was that he feels that there is so much movement currently in the corporate world towards change, that actually the old story that governments can't make the change because of the corporations is no longer true. And that in many places, it's the corporations putting pressure on the governments and speaking to the governments about radicalizing their response to climate change and putting in place legislature that would help them, the corporations also. So this is a really interesting move that's happening in the corporate world. And I wonder how you experience that, how you see that. And I know that you've also been personally involved in the divestment movement of, for instance, the oil companies. And, how is that all taking shape, taking form? And I want to move also in the direction of, we were speaking about money as water and flow, and how can the flow of money be redirected?
Patricia, do you want to talk about your work with CEOs and shareholder engagement? Because you've probably seen the acceleration of this maybe more than most people I would know.
Yeah, I would say especially in regards to climate issues, I have been saying this for years, is that corporations actually were ahead of not only government, but of investors themselves. And so, and not all of them. And there's certainly issues that we need to deal with even in the transition to alternative solutions. You know, it's like, we can think about lithium or, you know, wind turbines and things. So it's not a, you know, a clean solution, this transition, but because corporations have to deal with the effects of climate change, they are often having to look at, like, well, what are we doing around the supply chain, and how are we? They're seeing the risks of, you know, being dependent upon oil and gas, when they are seeing that beginning to disappear as an option. So that's where I think that, you know, I don't want to paint corporations as like they're these really, you know, empathetic organizations, but it's a business argument. The reality is this is no longer a financially viable approach. Many of the approaches that we are trying to dismantle, they're beginning to see it's not financially viable. And so that's the argument that often gets them to move. And there's a very big shareholder engagement movement that has been happening over probably, you know, 4 or 5 decades now. And so there was a period where you would have environmental, so let's keep it specifically to climate and the environment.
Explain what shareholder engagement is, Patricia, just briefly, because not everybody.
So shareholder engagement, when you own shares, you have the right to vote those shares. And so every year there's annual shareholder meetings. And at those shareholder meetings, you can introduce a resolution to have the company act in a specific way. And so, for example, around the environment, you may ask Pepsi-Cola to reduce the amount of plastic bottles that they have. You may ask a utilities company to transition to alternative energy away from, you know, relying upon coal and gas and oil. And in the early years, you would see those resolutions, those would get votes, would be maybe supported by maybe 3, maybe 5, maybe 9% of the shareholders. And that was a big success. Today, those resolutions are supported by 30, 40, 80% of the shareholders. So it's really, really exciting. And so this is that divest, work inside, invest. So there's 3 parts of it. You divest. So divestment, or these shareholder resolutions, are kind of the stick. First, you dialogue with companies. You get them to change, and you bring a coalition of people so that they know the trillions of dollars Dana talked about, like some of those trillions are going to leave your company if you don't make these changes. And so there's dialogue. If they don't move in dialogue, then you do a shareholder resolution. And then if they get enough votes, and even, you know, 20, 30% of the votes makes a company pay attention significantly. And then the last carrot is divest. It's like, okay, if you're never going to change, we're never going to own Exxon, right? We're not going to buy you. And so the fossil fuel free movement, the vast majority of our clients, and I think a vast majority of the foundations that Dana worked with, now do not own oil and gas to as much as is possible within their portfolios. And the reason I say much as is possible, because, you know, ice cream has byproducts of petroleum in it. So you have to like really be, you know, really conscious. But and so that's the whole transition, and that is really moving that direction. So there's both the business argument and the shareholder pressure on corporations that is beginning to affect this change much more dramatically than we have ever seen before. Be clear, you still have to make sure once commitments are made that they are following through with those commitments, and also looking at any alternative, because the other is invest. Where do we invest? Where do we move that for positive solutions? Are there extractive, you know, elements of the new solutions, right? So it's not a, it is an ongoing process, which is the other thing that gets you back into thinking about the Pocket Project and how this moves forward. It is a discussion that has to continue to include all of the stakeholders, and recognition and presencing and people coming together with that respect for each other and where everybody is, and recognizing where we've come from and the trauma we've all dealt with, to continue to move it forward. I mean, having the Pocket Project in corporate boardrooms
would be amazing. Amazing. Yeah, it would be amazing. And also, for this is a different tangent, I want to talk about the importance of activism, but also the kind of practices around compassion for leaders. It's so hard to be a leader. We all hate CEOs. I'm a CEO. You know, it's really hard to be a leader. Again, an unpopular thing to say, but right now it's like, actually, I think someone on the meditation that Thomas had earlier today was talking about how she'd been a negotiator in the process for a long time, and how she appreciated being on today's meditation because it made her have compassion for everybody inside the process. And that people are there doing jobs. And a lot of times they may be holding a position that they don't personally agree with. But excellent leadership means leaving your personal ideas at the door some of the time and stepping forward to represent an organization or a board of directors or a country, whether you agree exactly with your mandate. So again, thinking about holding the leadership in compassion, that they can find a way to express their authentic selves in ways that other people can hear them, is so important. But also to just shower them with gratitude for showing up. I could never be a negotiator in the UNFCCC process. I can't even imagine having that level of responsibility, right? I mean, it's so easy to be angry and frustrated, but thank God for those individuals that are showing up to do this work on behalf of all of us. And I just want to say something about the importance of activism to what Patricia was saying. Morgan Stanley had a client call the other day, and I was lucky enough to be able to listen in. And they were interviewing Al Gore, who should be our, let's all have posters of Al Gore in our bedrooms, thanking Al for making us all aware of climate change before anyone else. But he was talking about, how the tide has turned, and no matter what, the climate change movement is unstoppable now. And he's so happy, even though the outcomes in Glasgow are not going to be exactly what we all hope for, he's so happy still that everybody's still showing up for the process and the accomplishments that are being made. Morgan Stanley's recent client research shows that 99% of millennials, 99% want to invest in sustainability. 99% of high net millennials want to invest in sustainability. The jury's come back. There's no future for companies that aren't committed to sustainability. There's no future. And I spoke with JP Morgan about 2 years ago, and they were talking about how they were greening all their offices, as that was their contribution at the time. And I asked how are these decisions being made? And they said it's from the millennials working inside the bank, pushing them. And they're having to make these changes because of activism of their employees inside the banks pushing for these changes. So you've got activists inside these organizations, and then you've got the activists in the streets, and then you've got the activists that, Patricia's one of them, in the boardrooms of these companies. And the companies are kind of everywhere they go. Their banners are being hung, people are stampeding in boardrooms. The young employees are demanding change. That gives the older employees courage to demand change. And that is what's making this kind of change we see happening among corporates. But at the same time, we have to be so careful to watchdog. The role now moving forward of investors and activists is to watchdog these changes, because these companies can say they're committing to net zero, but it is our job as citizens to make sure that they do. And if we find that they're talking out of both sides of our mouths, it's our job, as Patricia said, to divest with our dollars, whether we stop buying toothpaste from one company and we start buying it from another, or we literally divest our portfolios. I am 100% a values aligned investor, and I am not a high net person at all. I have 100% of all of my stocks and all of my mutual funds are fossil free, values aligned stocks. And I'm very proud of how my portfolio looks, because I got out of fossil fuels early on when I listened to some of the people I work with warn investors to do it. all of us can move our mutual funds, all of us can move our retirement accounts, and all of us can change our buying habits. And those are things that we all need to do. And all of us need to practice activism wherever we can.
Wonderful. That was very passionate and very inspiring. And I just want to also, in this moment, just say that's a direct invitation to each person here to really think very precisely, where is even a small amount of money that I own, where is this line? With which bank? With which investment? If I do have a pension, where is it? And instead of just, as you said very early on, to really start exploring ourselves. How do I spend any cent I spend? How generous am I in passing on my wealth to others in need? Where do I hold on to my money? I just love this invitation. And also, as you spoke, both of you, Patricia and Dana, I remembered that today I suddenly had this memory of my experience of transformation in South Africa, and just because I grew up right in the, I was born 1968, so I really grew up in the 70s and 80s when Umkhonto we Sizwe, like the violence was growing in the country, and it was so palpable, and apartheid was so outdated and so unjust, and people were struggling, and there was such a hopelessness. And then at one point, I could feel it in my blood. And I was sitting because I was involved in the whole anti-apartheid movement. And one day I remember I was looking at the birds in the sky, and suddenly I knew the tide has turned. This is over now. It's over. I can walk out of the anti-apartheid. I don't have to do any political activism again because it's over. And it still took a year or something for Nelson Mandela to be freed and for the real change to happen. It was palpable earlier than it actually happened. But that change in the tide, and something in what you just said spoke to that change in the tide. And I think underneath all the hopelessness and all the frustration here at COP26, I have more of a sense of that change of tide than ever before.
That's so good to hear. That's so good to hear.
Yeah, and this is also my 11th COP. It's like been going a long time. Yeah, so, I would like to bring one, maybe probably our last topic, because I actually know that Patricia needs to go in 5 minutes. So I'm going to keep this really short, and I'm so sorry you have to leave, Patricia. But it's really about these, they've promised $130 trillion to be invested in net zero economy. And, the thing is about economies of scale, or, who receives this money and how big do you have to be? And how can we actually link it to the collective intelligence? How can it flow down into the small nooks and crannies instead of being caught by the big tankers of corporations? And how would you do this?
So, there's multiple vehicles, and we've been talking about corporations, but the whole system of values aligned investing includes public companies that are traded on stock exchange, private companies that are not owned by outside shareholders, have just internal shareholders and not traded publicly, community development financial institutions, loan funds. And there's this whole discussion of concessionary versus market-based. Like, do you need to make what the, S&P 500 is like, it's like, in my opinion, many of the benchmarks that people use to say how well money is doing has nothing to do with who we are. They're not related at all. I get a lot of pushback from my financial friends when I talk about what bullshit benchmarks are. But so then, but how do you get money into the capillaries? There are institutions ready to receive that money. And it's a matter of having multiple institutions, I think, geographically all over many places, working on many themes, because one of the values of some of the smaller institutions are that they are small. And Dana and I were talking about this a little bit last night. What is scale? Why does everything always have to be scale?
Yes.
When are things, there are many things that the appropriate size is smaller because it serves a community, and that investment or debt, there can be 0% investment from a money point of view, but what you get back in regards to what it does to building your community is a value that's not being counted. So I have to say one quick thing before we leave, just so is I am no longer CEO. So we have a new CEO, Stephanie Cohn-Rupp. So I'm now the chairperson of the partner group here. So I forgot to say that earlier, but I need to say that. So sorry about that. But the other key point I want to make before I leave too is within this process of change, I think it is really paramount that the voices at the table at all levels of all different types of businesses in our economies have to be diverse and represent the demographics of the communities that they're in. And the demographics of whoever they are affecting, whoever those stakeholders are. And that truly helps enable us, as Dana was talking about, of younger people that are in these companies inside changing. Many of those younger next generation are women, are people of color, are indigenous, so that is not anywhere near where it needs to be, but that has to also, alongside of this, really be encouraged and supported. And that too is where bringing together those discussions around trauma and how different sectors are experiencing this trauma and how to help open up that empathy and open up to me, opens up actually real flow discussions around innovations and solutions.
Beautiful. And I hear you really speaking to the democratization of business, which is amazing, and if we see the failure of democracy in some of our political systems, to imagine that there could be a democratization of our economies is very inspiring to me. So Patricia, I want to thank you, and maybe we bring Dana, just pin Dana as well, so we can thank you together for your presence here today. Thank you so much.
Such an honor to be here. Honestly,
Yeah.
such an honor.
Really wonderful to be here with you.
Thank you, and to everybody else that's participating.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye. Yeah, and I'm so glad, Dana, that you're with us, because there have been also some brilliant questions, coming through in the chat, and, some brilliant comments. And I think it would be great to bring some of those in the room, and maybe there's a few more comments you want to make before we go there, and then we can just move to opening up to questions.
Well, I guess I was just thinking that Patricia raised the issue of the importance of diverse leadership several times during her remarks, and probably it might not be well known publicly, it should be, that there is a big movement in the values-aligned investing industry to uplift and amplify the voices of people of color, of indigenous leaders, and also of women. And so, just internal to our industry, for those that aren't in the financial industry, we've seen a big change in the fact that, most of the time now, you'll see women on panels. So that's a thing. It's very socially inappropriate to have an all-male panel. So again, in Patricia's absence, I do want to acknowledge her leadership on that, because she was really one of the women who pushed hard around the gender, it's called the gender lens investing movement. And that's what that brought us. And now there's kind of a parallel movement uplifting the voices of people of color in the industry. You'll find in venture capital, less than 1% of all capital is managed by Black people. And so there's a big effort to try to drive assets to asset managers who might be extremely high performing money managers, but just can't get meetings with clients like the people that I work with, because of a network of a sort of homogenous network of relationship. It all comes back to relationship, where, you know, people are investing their money with who they trust, and who they trust is someone they went to graduate school with or college with, or an extended family member or a friend of a family member. And we're trying to open the door and help people of color get meetings so that they can have a chance to compete for these precious resources. And it's critical to the climate crisis.
I just want to say thank you. That was so great to hear that, you know, also just that, you know, the networks of privilege, you know, to have that acknowledged, and how deep that goes, you know. And as women, we said that about the male networks, right? And that's still happening. But to really acknowledge that in the way you just did, how that hampers the work of people of color and Indigenous people is just,
there's a great book people could read by Anand Giridharadas called Winners Take All. It's a couple of years old now, but if you haven't heard of it, read it or heard it, it's excellent. I would highly recommend everybody to check that out.
Yeah, so thank you. And I've read a few good questions in the chat, you know. Yeah, I wonder, Mariama has just brought, you know, she also says she's been working in climate finance for many years. I wonder, Mariama, whether there's a question or a comment that you would like to bring online to us, just to add to your, but also anybody else. If you're interested in bringing your question online, I'll just, you know, hand it over to you all to raise your hands.
Or to share ideas.
Hi, thank you, Kosha. And I really have been enjoying this discussion. It's so refreshing. I worked for many years in the US doing economic literacy work, and worked with women in philanthropy and a lot of the young people who formed the funding exchange, trying to do different things with money, inherited money, that was socially useful and socially necessary. So your discussion brought that up to me. That kind of activism, however, is not, I don't see it in the climate finance space, which tends to be dominated by entity which I think have long outlived some of their usefulness, like the World Bank and others. I think we have some kind of and other institutions and the Development Bank, but they don't get to communities in developing countries, and I think similarly here. So I'm wondering, how do we begin to bring some structure and some thinking into how we move beyond this whole discussion of scale? Because women are denied money because of scale. Oh, women's projects are so small, community projects are so small. But that is where the adaptation is. That's where resilience is. They're the one that serves community. And so I'm wondering if some of the techniques that you're using is adaptable to some of the climate finance, you know, even if we have to go through some of the existing institutions. Don't like to create more institutions, but we may need to create some more institutions. But there's this disconnect between climate finance and where it needs to go and helping people, particularly women and others,
Yeah, Mariama, I want to say I heard your comments earlier in the meditation with Thomas. I really appreciated your remarks. They were great. So thank you. Thank you for all your work representing the world in all these conversations. I mean, I think the issue of scale is, it's just this weird kind of talking out of both sides of our mouth. We know that the climate crisis is a local, it's going to be experienced at the local level or the regional level as climate, you know, the climate toll takes its impact on communities. And yet still the capitalist drumbeat, and even in the COP process, it's all about scale. I kind of giggled, Kasha, when you said 100 and whatever the number is today, $140 trillion. I mean, Mark Carney, again, God bless Mark Carney. It's an enormous sum of money, but we're thinking the more money we raise, the greater our chances to reduce scale. There's just something that's not making sense here, right? So I think we have to think about, really challenge and interrogate the notion of scale, because scale and scaling as a model, as a metric of success, is a very capitalist concept.
Mhm.
But climate change is asking us to look more at the local level and to live more locally, to travel less, to eat locally, and all of this sort of stuff. So if we're only measuring the success of companies by their scale, we're going to create even more perverse dynamics economically. So I think, I don't have the answer, but I think your question is an excellent one. And I also think embedded in your question is the answer, which is women. So I've been kind of entertaining myself with some of our friends here at Confluence and saying, you know, and not to offend anybody, I don't want to offend anybody, but just imagine, if you would, how would it be different if women made the rest of the decisions about the deployment of capital to solve climate change? How would it be? It would be transformative, right? And we would be probably less obsessed with technological solutions than biological solutions, than community-based solutions. So there's a gender issue that's really embedded in all of this, and scale, the question of scale is very much embedded in gender. And I think it's up to us as women in these spaces to challenge these notions of scale, challenge technological solutions, keep reminding people of biological solutions, nature-based solutions, all of that. So one organization I'm sure that you know better than me, but and for others, is Energy Access for All, is a great organization, getting money and resources to locally based women entrepreneurs in the global South. So that's a great organization, and they need support. So everybody on here can donate whatever you can spare to support some of these great organizations working around the world. Every one of us can be a philanthropist. I'm a philanthropist. I'm not a high net person. I support communities significantly with where I can, and everybody else can too. Thank you, Mariam, for your question. And if we're happy to continue offline with you if we could do anything to co-create or ideate together.
Great. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Right.
Great. Thanks, Mariama and Dana. And I just also want to ask Tracy Gray, you brought a question into the chat.
Yay, Tracy.
On. Yeah, and I just hope you're still here because I found your question really interesting. So, you know, if you want to bring it online, please let us know. And then we'll go, yeah, so Nela has the issue that she doesn't have a camera, which personally I don't find ideal for these kind of calls, you know, because it's just lovely to also be able to relate to each other energetically and see each other. But, you know, it's great. We'll bring you on, Nela, and I would just ask you to keep your question essential. Over to you.
Yes, thank you. I will keep it short. My question is maybe a bit radical and very simple, and at the same time very complex. It's isn't it the best to not bring any money into the system, because our kind of money system feeds this ecological crisis? So how about bringing local currencies to local groups of people, for example, nurturing locally? Yes, this is my question.
Question of local currency. Well, that's interesting. It goes back to kind of in the beginning where I was mentioning how cash, you know, may have been the first greatest human trauma, the creation of a cash economy. There are efforts around the world to use alternative currencies. The Transition Towns movement is a great resource to learn more about that. I know it's been successful in southern parts of the UK, and I know there's an active group in Vancouver, Canada. I think as we get more along into the climate crisis, we may see more of that. On the other end of the spectrum is obviously the acceleration of digital currencies and cryptocurrency, and people trying to get out of the cash system onto electronic platforms. The trouble with that is when we experience climate collapse and regions go down without electricity for days or weeks or possibly longer, well, digital currency isn't going to work. If you have no electricity, you can't trade money through cryptocurrency. So place-based currencies are something that is interesting. They haven't gotten as much attention as maybe they should. So the resource I would point to would be the Transition Towns movement. And there may be others. Kasha, I think you guys at Findhorn know more about that maybe than I do.
Well, the Global Eco-Village Network is also very rich with training, teaching, beautiful examples. But yes, yeah, that's
It's
great.
a good question. But I actually would say also, as we saw in the pandemic, and we sometimes see when there's a climate event, you know, just people sharing is just such an important thing. So one of my beloved friends, who's an asset manager, when the pandemic was happening in Oakland, California, where we were living together and people were hoarding things and the stores were closed, she actually was cooking food at home and driving around and giving it to people who she knew lived alone. And it was one of the most beautiful acts I saw anybody do during the early days of the pandemic. And that's the kind of behavior we need to exhibit in these times.
Beautiful, thank you. Yeah, and just speaking to that generosity, it just reminds me that Thomas often brings as one of the first principles, the open circle, and that in any of the great traditions of the world, there's usually a 10% of our income or what we own that is, we're invited to pass on, just to keep the world healthy and resourced. So, you know, just one small input here. And Barney, are you able to put on your camera? I know you did last time. You were cooking, you were noodle soup. So we'd love to see you again. Over to you, Barney.
I'm still making lunch again. So I'm still eating lunch all the time.
So what are you eating today?
I'm eating a pho, which is a Lebanese bean dip. And it's really rich in protein and gives me all the carbohydrates.
Right.
And I eat it with raw vegetables.
Oh, that sounds wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing.
So my question is, I think I posted it, to lower our cognitive load, because money is portable. Money also does not require us to be in relationship to the other.
Barney, sorry, you're breaking up. So the internet connection isn't so good. It was great to see you. You'll probably have to turn off your video so we can hear your voice clearly, but it was still just wonderful to see you for a moment.
Okay. Can you guys hear me now?
Yes, now we can. Just start again.
So the work I do connects with our contemporary problems to consciousness and who in us is making decisions. So one of the things I found with money is that it helps us reduce our cognitive load because money is portable. And also it's able to be transactable all over the world. But the biggest thing is that it does not put us in relationship to the other. And therefore, we can externalize and invisibilize any harm that's behind money. But the biggest thing is this meta drive to reduce our cognitive load. That's why we don't go on the bus, because we don't want to be in conversation with people we don't want to be in conversations with, and we end up using our car. So is this inner drive to reduce our cognitive load? I see that forms of breaking our relationships with each other. So we shop local when we only have the mindfulness that it's actually money that's going to flow into the capillaries of our community. But money can easily be disassociated from those capillaries because there is no consciousness that's tied into money. So my question is, doesn't money point to this inner drive that we are constantly seeking to reduce our cognitive load, because or else we'll be overwhelmed, and especially in a world that's getting noisier and busier, we're even disassociating ourselves further.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think that you know, again, it circles back to that kind of the beginning of the conversation where we're talking about how money replaced community and reciprocity-based economies. So in a reciprocity-based economy, If you have ever been lucky enough to visit, you know, a traditional indigenous homeland where they're not really using cash yet, the way life works is based on reciprocity. So I'm sick, you come and bring me water. Next time you're sick, I'm going to come and bring you firewood or milk, and people live that way in tight-knit communities probably since the beginning of time. And it's just since the origination of cash, as you said, so that, you know, we could transact in a larger region, that these relationships began breaking down. And I think now, if I just look at myself, you know, as much meditation, mindfulness, whatever that I try to find time to do each week, walking in the woods, whatever it might be, I still live in a place of scarcity, because from my earliest childhood, I was growing up in a culture that is based on scarcity. How are you going to make money? How are you going to support yourself? And so the money, I think you make an excellent point, is it prevents us from having to be vulnerable, from having to be in relationship. Because living in a place where when you're sick, you depend on people bringing you resources, whether you like them or not, you're going to bring them resources, whether you like them or not. But when we put money in it, we can just buy things to insulate us from human relationship and insulate us from the earth. So I think fundamentally this is our crisis of consciousness, but I don't know how we fix that. But I do think climate change is going to help us realize how important it is to live in community and how important our friendships and our relationships are. And I think the pandemic has done that too. I was reflecting last night on the people that have come back into my life since the pandemic began and those who have left. So I've been so happy to reconnect with old friends from Findhorn, and that's how I'm here today, and some other friends. And then there's other people when I was running and traveling all over the world that I spent a lot of time with that I've lost touch with. So it's very interesting when we look at these ebbs and flows of relationship and who crisis brings towards us and who crisis pushes away. And I think the challenge of climate change will make us more and more aware of that. I don't have the answer though. I think the way you expressed it is very beautiful and insightful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Barney. Yeah, thank you for coming online. And Yvonne, are you able to turn on your video?
Hello, Kasia. Hello, Dana. No, I don't have a camera on my laptop, but I want to share that Dana just mentioned that she don't know how to do the change, and I know somebody who gives lectures about feeding the ground and stopping this whole consuming process, and he doesn't ask money for this. And also his wife does community work, but they asked 2 years ago, they asked people to support them with money on a regular basis. So they now have an income, and they don't ask money for their work. So maybe that can inspire. His name is Mark Siepman.
Yeah, you could just write it in the chat.
Yes.
Yvonne. That would be lovely. Thank you so much for sharing.
But it's in Dutch.
Yeah, but that's beautiful. Thank you for bringing that. I was just thinking, in effect, that's how Anna and I work. You know, we ask you all to support our work, and that enables us to come here to COP26 and then bring this program and gift it to everybody, you know. So it's a bit
amazing.
similar. Yeah.
So amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. So we only have like 9 more minutes. So I hope we can get to both of you. And we really appreciate if we can actually see you and not just hear the voice, just because we're already online. Great. So we can see you both. So let's see, Francesca and Celine, if the questions are so short and the responses are short, we can make space for both of you.
I'll try.
Great.
So for me, I guess for me, I mean, I was part of, I think materialism has become the new religion. And I believe we're indoctrinated into it. We're born into it. And for me, it's really about returning back to my naturalness. And I think the world needs more soul. Like the world needs our soulfulness. And I just got bullied out of my apartment because for money, right? I just got bullied from my home because my landlord wanted more money. He wanted a profit, and he gave me a lot of stress. I went through a lot of stress as a result of it. And I know for me, I really believe the way we change it is really returning to our naturalness, becoming more natural, connecting to the earth, connecting to the animals, changing our belief system that our value comes from what we own and what we do, and really reminding ourselves that our value comes from who we are and our relationships with one another, our relationships with the animals, our relationship with the earth. I really try to hold back from spending money that I really don't need to spend, and really trying to focus on, what do I need and what do I really want? Not the wants that I've been indoctrinated to believe are my wants, but what are the wants of my soul? What does my soul want? And you know what? My soul wants connection. My soul wants relationship. My soul wants love, like the real thing, the real deal, right? And that's how I believe we change it, is to stop ourselves from believing what we've been told and to really returning back to our natural essence. And not easy, right? Because we live in our minds and our belief system. It's really about coming home to our beingness. Not easy, not easy to do. But that's where I am now, and I've been through so much recently, and it's really waking me up a lot.
Yeah.
Great.
Sorry.
Thank you.
May I offer something? So I'm sorry what happened with your landlord. That sounds so, I can relate. I'm out of my house right now for completely different reasons, but I know what it feels like. Next time, maybe befriend the landlord, not because you want to manipulate them in case something else happens, but if the landlord has relationship with you, I don't know what you relate, maybe you guys were best friends and you had a falling out. I'm making assumptions, but it's all about this relationship piece, right? I'm in an Airbnb and I'm staying with the most wonderful couple here while I'm out of my home. They've been so generous to me, but we both, on both sides, we've worked really hard to create relationship for the short time I've been here. And I know they'll be friends of mine after I leave. I think that's the goal, is like, how do we try to make friendship everywhere we go? And when we do that, it makes the trauma aspect begins to sort of dissipate a little bit, because we're more open to supporting one another. So just an idea. I
agree with you, Dana. Only unfortunate thing is, when a corporation, I was shocked. What happened to me, I was shocked. It woke me up, because these people didn't want to be in relationship with me, is quite evident.
That's the capitalist system. Yeah.
Right? The corporation did not see me as a person. They dehumanized me. And that's the wake-up call for me. And yeah, I agree with you, but they wouldn't see me as a person, as a human being.
Yeah.
I was working against their belief system of seeing me as getting in the way of them making money.
Yeah.
That's
that's the activist part. So those are the parts to change for sure. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I hope that you land in the best place for you. I hope that you find a good place. Yeah.
The best place is awake, right? The best place is to be awake.
Yeah.
And I tell you something, it woke me up and I'm
Yeah.
still recovering from it. That's my share.
Good luck.
Great. Thank you so much. And we only have like 3 more minutes, Celine, but it would just be lovely to hear from you. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Dana, my question is pretty specific. I have friends in Bali, local Balinese, who have been working on regenerating the land, working with farmers and people who have lost their jobs because there's no more tourism this past few years and who want to go back to the land, but don't know how because they have never worked the land. And they've been doing such amazing work with very, very little money. They haven't been asking much. They just ask like whoever wants to donate money, whatever you can. And I have absolute trust and faith in his friends because I've supported them on and off for a few years now. They never ask for anything specifically, but I'm thinking because I have in the past done birthday fundraisers for different projects. And my hope is always that people who donate will continue to donate of their own accord subsequently so I can move on to a different organization every year. It hasn't really happened. So this year I've been trying to teach myself a bit about alternative financing models that don't require organizations to scale rapidly because sometimes that's not the nature of what they're doing. And so I found a model that I think is suitable for what my friends are doing. And I know that if I suggest it to them, I will have to be willing to help set this into process because all the energy, they are not asking any money from the farmers and from the people who have asked them for help. They separately have their own jobs or freelance jobs that they use to support themselves and their families. So 100% of the donations they receive goes into the people that they're helping. And I even tried to say like, would you be willing to accept money for the cost of your transportation when you go from, different towns and villages, even to the neighboring islands, to pay for your transportation? They're like, I guess that would be okay, but they don't really want to get paid for what they're doing, which is, so they just want everyone to have enough. So now my question is about expectations, because I know that when I've asked people for donations in the past, they give it as gifts because it's my birthday, and to them it's like a birthday gift to me. They don't expect anything in return. Whereas once I start to say like, can we do patient capital investments, you may not get any return for the next 5 years, and even then it's not guaranteed. But there will be, even without asking the past few years, my friends have been documenting everything that they've been doing. So there will be results on the ground. So in my mind now, I'm thinking about the expectations of like people donating as gifts.
Yeah.
Versus something that's a little, even though it's not quite buying a share in a listed company, but there's still a transactional element to it. And
so how do you set
Celine,
that up?
Maybe we hear a short response from Dana because we're at time now. And then we just, thank you very much.
I'm trying to think of a good resource for you. I mean, it's not uncommon, and I can relate to your personal awkwardness around being in this role as kind of a bridge or an intermediary. It may be that it is easier to simply just raise money and give it to them. So maybe part of it is, maybe the reason it's feeling a little awkward is the sense that there needs to be a return. If you have people that are willing to just be generous and they know that they trust you to help facilitate their generosity, then that's a gift that you're carrying. and maybe embrace that, although I know how awkward it is. If there's a real desire to start a more transactional relationship where people are investing and there's a return, there's resources out there for you. And I wish I could, I would say do your own learning and learn online. There's also organizations that might be able to be helpful that are already operating in the region, where you could even help them raise money and then give it to them. And then they facilitate all of the paperwork and administration and tracking that has to go into something once it becomes a return on investment type of situation. But I think if what you have is a group of people that love you and they don't know how to give, and you're the person in their life that they trust to give to, and that you're doing something that they respect and admire somewhere else, then just work on being comfortable with being that facilitator of generosity and love and acceptance across that, and maybe explore the discomfort in that space. And I'm offering that to you as someone who lives in that space. And it's not easy. And I have to sometimes ask myself, why is this so uncomfortable for me? It's a wonderful to be that person that people trust in two different kind of realms. And it's also hard to be the person that walks on the tightrope between those realms. I understand, but I think it's beautiful what you're doing. And I wish I could be more helpful and give you a very specific resource, but the one that's coming up, it feels like your own personal exploration around this.
Thank you,
So, yeah, thank you, Celine. And we're at the end of our time, so we need to complete there. But I think, you see, Dana's also at the end of her time. But I just think that invitation to you, Celine, to become, what was it? An ambassador of generosity, trust, and acceptance, something like that. What a beautiful role description. Really fantastic. So I think that's maybe more of us could take on that job of being bridge builders for new money flows into the capillaries of our communities. Yeah. Huge thank you to you, Dana, and to Patricia. I think it was truly, and I think we also really see it in the chat, that this was a conversation that many people deeply appreciated, and somehow an unusual conversation. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Dana, for the heart you're bringing into this whole field.
Thank you.
Very healing. That's what it says in the chat. So
thank you, everyone. Thank you for staying with us and for all you're doing, and just blessings for all of you, and Godspeed to everyone to halt the climate crisis. And thank you for showing up for this work. This is the hard work here that Kosh is leading. So thank you. Thanks, everyone, and have a good evening and a good afternoon wherever you are.
yeah. Yeah, and the Pocket Project would love to continue collaborating. So
we would love that as well. On behalf of the Confluence community, we look forward to more of these conversations. Thank you, and thank you for your pioneering work. Yeah.
Big hug, Dana.
Big hug to everybody.
Big
Bye, everyone.
Bye.